It's autumn 1517. To the great consternation of his bishop and the Pope, Martin Luther, the young lecturer of the University of Wittenberg, publishes his 95-point thesis. The disputation on the power and efficacy of indulgences is reprinted in thousands of copies and reaches all the major European countries within a year. But how did we get here? In 1517, the Catholic Church is still in full control. Catholic means universal, a likely title considering the Church's monopoly over the minds and souls of the Western world, which is certainly universal. Or is it? By the late Middle Ages, the Church was in a crisis. Popes, the figureheads of the Catholic Church, were figureheads of corruption. They were often no better than worldly princes, only caring about wealth and power, not shying away from war, treachery and torture. They often kept concubines, fathered children, and some were even open homosexuals. Cardinals, bishops, and archbishops were not much better. Being almost exclusively aristocrats, they shared the same outlook as the popes. Their offices were usually the result of bribes rather than competence or devotion. In many cases, familiar ties played a role, the sons of popes becoming cardinals and the sons of cardinals becoming bishops. If clever enough, one such church potentate could amass as many offices as he wanted, serving as bishop of 2, 3, or even more dioceses. And by service, they often meant nothing more than collecting rent from the many offices that they held. Actual work was done by the humble parish priest or monk. Most of these men were of peasant stock, just as poor and illiterate as their congregation. Like their superiors, they often kept concubines, fathered children, and engaged in petty corruption. Mass was often nothing more than the priest reciting verses in broken Latin that neither he nor his congregation understood. Much of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century was marked by the Avignon captivity of the popes, and later the Great Western Schism. During this time there were popes and there were anti-popes, both claiming sovereignty over the church. Later, during the conciliar movement, popes battled a plethora of religious councils for supremacy of the church. By the time the popes won, the credibility and prestige of the church were long gone. With such turmoil in the Catholic Church, it is no wonder that Reformation was a centuries-long desire. In the late 12th century, a reforming heresy arose in Lyon. The Waldensians advocated for a humbler and poorer church, questioning many dogmas and religious customs, such as the purgatory, saints, pilgrimages, and transubstantiation. The church mercilessly persecuted the Waldensians, and the creed didn't spread very far from its place of origin. By 1517, there are only isolated pockets of worshippers. Another sect, the Lollards, emerged in late 14th century in England. The Lollards were followers of John Wycliffe, an Oxford scholar who translated the Bible into English. The Catholic Church had been using the Latin Bible since the 4th century, however few people in England understood Latin. Wycliffe believed that the prime authority in religious matters should be the Bible. Based on this, the Lollards condemned the pomp and ceremony as well as the worldliness and corruption of the Church. Similarly to the Waldensians, they did not believe in transubstantiation or the benefices of saints and pilgrimages. Initially, some members of the nobility were backing the Lollards to oppose the king. However, after the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, that was allegedly inspired by Lollards, they were declared heretics and had been persecuted ever since. Lollardry also didn't spread very far, neither did it enjoy a large following. The first reforming heresy to succeed was that of the Hussites. Jan Hus, the rector of the University of Prague, started preaching in a defense of Wycliffe's ideas. In 1412, he openly defied the Pope over the selling of indulgences. In 1414, Hus was lured to the Council of Constance to dispute his ideas with the Church's representatives. In spite of having received safe conduct, he was tried as a heretic and burned at the stake. His followers quickly organized themselves and vowed to defy the Pope. When the King of Bohemia died and Sigismund of Luxembourg, the king's brother, claimed the throne, the Czech nobility turned against him and adopted Hussite beliefs. At the urging of the Pope, Europe's monarchs launched 5 crusades against the Hussites, all unsuccessful. Fighting lasted from 1419 to 1434. With the Compacts of Basel, Ultarquist, the moderate majority of the Hussites, reached compromise with the Catholic Church, allowing for a moderately reformed Czech national church. Taborites, the more radical arm of the Hussites, lost all power, and their members had to go into hiding. Renaissance and Humanism were the intellectual driving force behind these reformist movements. Humanists believe in studying and attempting to emulate the classics of the ancient world. While Italian humanists mostly concerned themselves with worldly matters, their northern counterparts focused their attention on the most popular classic of the day, the Bible. Humanists are captivated by the apostolic church of the early Christians, one of modesty and piety, in stark contrast with the corruption of the 16th century church. Humanists intend to reform the church, not by heresy, but rather by education and careful reform. To this end, in 1516, the leading northern humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam translates the New Testament from its original Greek into Latin. At first, the Bible had been translated into Vulgate Latin in the 4th century. This was copied by hand by generations of monks, many passages being added, others being omitted. Now with Erasmus's translation, there finally is a standard Bible, and this time, instead of being laboriously copied by monks, it is disseminated all throughout Europe in printed form. In conjunction with humanism, capitalism is taking off in Northern Europe. Urbanization is the order of the day, and with urbanization and printing comes increased literacy not only for the middle classes, but also for some members of the urban proletariat and even the peasantry. Universities spring up left and right. From Paris to Krakow, humanists take up increasingly important roles at these universities, educating new generations of humanists and reformers. In spite of the continuous wars and the church's corruption, or perhaps because of it, popular versions of piety are more fashionable than ever. Saints and pilgrimages, popular devotions to Mary and to the 14 stages of the cross are the rage. Lay people form religious fraternities all across Europe and particularly in the Low Countries. They live piously like monks without being ordained themselves. They preach and teach, doing the church's job, but without being in the church. One could almost think that the Catholic Church and its services are not needed anymore. This is the world Luther was born into in 1483. Luther turns out to be a bright young man, therefore his middle-class parents sent him to law school, where Luther receives a humanist education. One fine day, while walking home from university, Luther is almost struck by lightning. He interprets this as a message from God, and to the consternation of his father, decides to become a monk. In his novice year, he is racked by doubts about his salvation, and becomes profoundly depressed. Getting to heaven is not a simple thing. According to the Catholic Church, first of all, one needs to have faith in God. Second, he has to do good works. Doing good works means doing good deeds, living like a pious Christian, praying and being charitable. Luther does good works to the extreme and gets even more depressed. Johann von Staupitz, his superior, convinces him that salvation comes from faith alone. At this realization, Luther snaps out of his depression and becomes well adjusted to monkish life. Later he becomes a lecturer at the newly founded University of Wittenberg, run by his religious order, the Augustines. Here he develops his theory of predestination that is based on the letters of Paul. According to Paul, in Luther's interpretation, salvation can only be achieved by faith, human effort and free will being completely excluded. However, if one is saved, one will automatically be inclined to do good works. Therefore, good works are the result of salvation, not the cause. Luther begins to teach his theory at Wittenberg, however he fails to attract significant attention, since such theories are quite common nowadays. The Great Sale of Indulgences of 1517 will change everything. Indulgences are a key component in the absolution of sin. According to the Catholic Church, to be absolved from sin, one has to complete 3 steps. First, one has to confess his sin. Second, he has to be sorry. And third, he has to do penance. Completing all the steps is very important, because otherwise one would end up in purgatory, a place almost as bad as hell. Doing penance in general means doing good works. However, if your sin is too great or you're just lazy, there's a shortcut. Indulgences are special documents dispensed by the Pope which can be used to replace good works. Their power is derived from the Treasurehouse of Merit. The Treasurehouse of Merit is the collection of all the merit of Jesus Christ and of the early Christians. The Pope, as the head of the Catholic Church, holds the key to this endless amount of merit. Indulgences had been around for centuries. However, as the purchasing power of the population had grown, so grew the scope and power of indulgences. As it happened, Albrecht of Brandenburg, the Archbishop of Magdeburg, Luther's superior, had recently obtained another archbishopric, that of the Electorate of Mainz. To pay the bribes that are necessary to buy such a position, Albrecht took up loans from the Fuggers. Now he is penniless and unable to pay his debt. He asks the Pope for a loan. However, Leo proposes something even better. He will organize a massive sale of indulgences. He will keep half the profit and use it to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica, and Albrecht will get the other half to repay his debt. The best market for this great sale is Germany, and the Pope sends the best salesman to complete the job. Johann Tetzel bursts on the indulgence market like a storm. He claims indulgences sold by him can be used to atone for future sins or for the sins of the deceased. These claims are unheard of, as indulgences are only supposed to be valid in the here and now for sins already committed and only for those living, not for the dead. However, as long as there is a market for them, Tetzel is there to satisfy the demand. Luther takes this for what it is, not simply a scam, but a grave endangerment of people's souls. He formulates his grievances in a 95-point thesis, not only denouncing the sale of indulgences, but also questioning the Pope's right to the Treasurehouse of Merit. On October 31st, 1517, Luther sends his disputation to his superior, Albrecht of Brandenburg. Albrecht immediately sees the problem with it and forwards a copy to the Pope. Leo X is very displeased. What is to come if Luther questions his right to the Treasurehouse of Merit? Papal power will again be eroded. Leo must prevent this at all cost. His answer is blunt and unprecedented. He decrees that the Pope is infallible and also that the Pope is the highest authority in the Church, even surpassing the Bible. As for Luther, in 1518 the Pope dispatches his best theologian to try to convince him of his errors and determine him to recant. Luther remains recalcitrant and insists he is right about indulgences. In 1519, the Pope deploys the hardliner, Johannes Eck, to debate Luther in Leipzig. Eck is determined to incriminate Luther, so during the three-day public debate, he relentlessly questions him on papal superiority. By the end, he backs Luther into a corner. Luther makes declarations that may well be interpreted as challenging the power of the Pope and of the religious councils. Eck declares Luther to be a heretic and a Hussite and runs back to the Pope with the evidence. The Pope issues an edict calling on Luther to recant his heretical views within 60 days or else be excommunicated. Luther will do no such thing. He takes the papal bull and publicly burns it. Thus, Luther officially becomes a heretic on the 3rd of January, 1521. Luther has nothing to lose now, so he concludes that as long as he is a heretic, he might as well formulate his heresy. To this end, he writes a series of books outlining his views on religion. Luther reaffirms his belief that salvation can only be achieved through faith. In the humanist tradition, he denies transubstantiation. Transubstantiation refers to the miracle of the Mass, when according to the Catholic Church, Christ's body and blood turns into bread and wine. Luther believes in consubstantiation, meaning Christ's body and blood is present during the Mass, but it does not turn into bread and wine. From this, Luther deduces that clergy have no divine powers, therefore they should also not have special status in society. Instead of a rigid church hierarchy, Luther believes in the priesthood of all believers. He insists that everyone should read and interpret the Bible, not just the priests. Most importantly, he states that the Bible, and not the Pope, is the supreme authority in religion. By now, Luther's works are widely circulated. With every major town having a printing press, books are usually reprinted. This allows books and pamphlets to spread like wildfire. After the Leipzig debate, Luther's ideas begin to garner nationwide fame. To stop this once and for all, Luther is summoned to the Imperial Diet of 1521 to be held at Worms with the newly crowned Emperor Charles V and all the princes of the realm in attendance. To ensure he gets a fair hearing and doesn't end up burned at the stake, he is given safe conduct by the Emperor. On his way there, he is cheered and celebrated by large and enthusiastic crowds. Luther never intended to start a heresy. However, now to his surprise, he discovered he did just that, and was quite successful at it, to say the least. At Worms, he is confronted by his archenemy Eck. He is ordered to recant all his heretical views. To everyone's dismay, Luther decides to listen to his conscience and refuses to disavow anything he had said or written. In response, the Emperor issues the Edict of Worms, condemning Luther and all those who hate him or follow him as heretics of the highest order, practically a death sentence. Luther still has 2 days' worth of safe conduct, however after that he is fair game. As an infamous outlaw, he may be killed or captured by anyone looking for a rich reward. With this premise, Luther sets out for Wittenberg and the certainty of uncertainty awaiting him there. With his days numbered, he can only trust in God, as unpredictable as God's ways are.